Pure technical talent isn't always enough to shine. We live in a world where a smooth talker can outshine a silent genius. This episode explores why style sometimes beats substance, from the Dr. Fox experiment, where an actor wowed experts with gibberish, to Dunning-Kruger overconfidence, and how snap judgments and first impressions, thin slicing, shape who we trust. We'll see why confident communicators often get ahead, sometimes despite weaker skills, the pitfalls of mistaking visibility for competence, and the quiet genius dilemma of brilliant people who get overlooked. Finally, we share practical tips to help engineers and anyone find their voice, speak up in meetings, and narrate their work so their talent gets the recognition it deserves. Introduction. Imagine two software engineers in a team meeting. Alice is a coding wizard who architected the hardest parts of the project, but she's soft-spoken and hesitant to present her ideas. Bob is less experienced and often borrows others' ideas, but he's a charismatic presenter, always ready to speak at length with confidence. When promotion time comes, who do you think gets tapped for team lead? Too often, it's Bob. Being highly skilled isn't always enough. You also have to articulate your ideas to be recognized, promoted, or trusted. In tech and many fields, it's not just what you know, but how you communicate it. As a seasoned engineer, I've seen quiet geniuses passed over while bold talkers leap ahead. It's a frustrating reality that we are about to unpack through stories, psychology, and lessons learned. In this journey, I'll walk you through some eye-opening experiments and real-life anecdotes that reveal a hard truth. Human beings can be swayed by style, often more than we'd like to admit. We'll see how a charismatic faker fooled an audience of experts, why people who know less often sound like they know more, and how snap judgments based on a few seconds can shape careers. We'll also explore the emotional toll this dynamic takes, how it feels to be the undervalued expert in the corner, and end with some advice on leveling up your communication game. So, if you've ever felt like the best-kept secret in your organization, or watched someone less capable rise simply by talking the talk, this one's for you. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let's dive into the stories and science behind why you need more than talent. You need a voice. The Dr. Fox effect, when style masquerades as substance. One of the most famous illustrations of style over substance is the Dr. Fox experiment. Back in 1970, a group of researchers conducted a cheeky study at the University of Southern California School of Medicine. They hired an actor named Michael Fox to play Dr. Myron L. Fox, an expert, and deliver a lecture to a group of educated professionals. The catch? The lecture content was complete nonsense, titled Mathematical Game Theory as Applied to Physician Education. It was intentionally packed with double talk, made-up jargon, and contradictions. The actor had zero expertise in the subject. His mission was simply to perform, to speak with confidence, warmth, humor, and enthusiasm, but say very little of substance. What happened? The professional audience, which included psychiatrists and psychologists, loved it. Despite the lecture being intellectually empty, attendees gave Dr. Fox glowing evaluations. In fact, in 3 separate sessions, the actor's engaging style completely masked the meaningless content. The audience walked away feeling they had learned something, purely because the presentation was so enjoyable. This startling result became known as the Dr. Fox effect. Simply put, a charismatic delivery can convince people of the value of content that is, in reality, garbage. As one summary put it, Fox's nonverbal behaviors so completely masked a meaningless, jargon-filled, and confused presentation. In other words, an energetic, confident speaker can create an illusion of expertise. The Dr. Fox experiment is a cautionary tale. It reminds us of times we've been wowed by a slick presenter at a conference or a meeting, only to later realize we can't recall a single useful thing they said. It's a bit unsettling. Even smart, educated people can be seduced by form over content. In everyday work life, it means that the colleague who speaks eloquently, even without much depth, can sometimes impress managers and teams more than the quiet person whose head is down actually solving problems. We've all left meetings thinking that presentation sounded great and only later wondered, wait, what did it actually mean? Much like applauding a beautifully wrapped but empty box, we can be prone to applauding the wrapping, dynamic speaking style and overlooking the gift inside real substance. The Dr. Fox effect sets the stage for why communication skills can so profoundly skew our perceptions of competence. The Dunning-Kruger effect, the overconfident learner and the quiet expert. Around the late 1990s, two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, stumbled upon a phenomenon that might explain why some overconfident talkers often get more credit than they deserve. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias where people with low ability in a domain overestimate their own skill. In essence, folks who don't know much about a subject often don't know what they don't know, so they mistakenly think they're pretty knowledgeable or talented. These are the classic confidently wrong people. We've all met the junior developer who just learned a bit of JavaScript and now proclaims they could rewrite the whole app in a weekend. Or the new team member who loudly asserts opinions on architecture without realizing their ideas are flawed. Because they lack the experience to recognize their mistakes, they brim with unwarranted confidence. And boy, do they sound sure of themselves. In contrast, people who are truly skilled tend to be more aware of the nuances and challenges. In other words, they know enough to know that there's much more they don't know. Paradoxically, that often makes experts speak with more caution or humility. Dunning and Kruger also noted this reverse effect. High performers often underestimate their abilities. Many competent engineers downplay their expertise, assuming if I can do this, probably everyone else can too. Sound familiar? It's basically the psychological flip side of Dunning-Kruger, and it's closely related to the infamous imposter syndrome. More on that later. So how does this play out in the workplace? Imagine a planning meeting for a new project. The less experienced but Dunning-Kruger affected person might boldly say, "This is easy, I can get it done in 2 weeks, no problem," speaking with total conviction. Meanwhile, a truly experienced colleague might say, "This is tricky, we should plan for uncertainties, maybe it'll take 6 to 8 weeks, and they'll sound less certain. To a manager who isn't technical, the confident proclamation can be more persuasive. Wow, Bob really has a handle on it. They might even start doubting the cautious expert. Why is Alice so unsure? Maybe she isn't as capable. This is how overconfident talkers often get more credit than quieter, more competent peers. It's a classic case of confidence being mistaken for competence. One place this effect is glaring is in hiring and promotions. Ever seen someone talk a big game in an interview and land the job only to struggle later? Candidates with Dunning-Kruger overconfidence might ace the interview with bravado, claiming they can do the job flawlessly regardless of their actual qualifications. Hiring managers can be dazzled by the "I've got this" attitude. If the person is hired based on swagger rather than skill, reality hits soon. They may fail to meet the job's demands, causing frustration all around. Meanwhile, excellent candidates who are more modest or self-critical might undersell themselves and get passed over. I've had a friend, an outstanding engineer, confessed that in job interviews she hesitated to tout her achievements, worrying she'd sound boastful or might not live up to expectations. Meanwhile, she saw a less qualified peer breeze through by confidently faking it till they make it, a textbook Dunning-Kruger move. It's painful, but it happens. To be clear, confidence itself isn't bad. The real takeaway from Dunning-Kruger is about calibration. Those who are least skilled are often over-calibrated in confidence, and those most skilled can be under-calibrated. The tragedy is that in team discussions or decisions, the loudest voice can drown out the right voice. As the saying goes, empty barrels make the most noise, and in our industry, those noisy barrels sometimes get rolled to the front of the line. Snap judgments and thin slices. Blink and you judge. Why do people fall for confident-sounding nonsense or overconfident folks in the first place? Part of the answer lies in how we humans make snap judgments. Malcolm Gladwell's popular book, Blink, talks about the power of thin slicing, our tendency to make quick assessments based on a thin slice of information. In plain terms, we often form an impression of someone's competence or trustworthiness within seconds of meeting them, or after just a brief exposure. It's practically a reflex. Think about your first day meeting a new team member. In the first 30 seconds, before they've even done any real work, you likely form some gut feeling, this person seems sharp, or they come off a bit unsure. What are those impressions based on? Probably little things: body language, tone of voice, how confidently they introduce themselves. Tiny cues. That's thin slicing in action. Our brains are wired to jump to conclusions quickly, often before conscious thought kicks in. This can be useful, sometimes first impressions are right, but it can also be wildly misleading. Gladwell notes that rapid cognition can lead to excellent insights or serious errors. For example, in Blink he describes how experienced art curators could instantly spot a fake sculpture by feel, and how a marriage expert could predict divorce likelihood by watching a couple for just a few minutes. Yet, he also warns that snap judgments can be incorrect, even dangerous, if we are thin slicing based on biases or incomplete data. There's fascinating research to back up how powerful these immediate impressions are. In one Princeton University study, participants were shown pairs of political candidates' photos for a tenth of a second and asked who looked more competent. Amazingly, those snap judgments of who looks more competent predicted the actual election winners about 70% of the time. In other words, many voters unconsciously chose leaders by face value, literally. Another classic study by psychologist Nalini Ambady found that students could watch just 6 seconds of a silent video of a professor, and their quick impressions would closely match the professor's end-of-term teaching evaluations. 6 seconds of observing gestures and expression was enough to judge who's an effective teacher. It's both remarkable and a bit scary how little information we sometimes use to form big conclusions. In the context of engineers and teams, thin slicing means that in the blink of an eye, your coworkers and managers are forming opinions about your competence. If in that thin slice you appear confident, upbeat, and clear in expressing yourself, people's gut may say, yep, they know their stuff. If you seem nervous, mumbling, or uncertain, the snap judgment might be, not too sure about them. This happens before any real work has been evaluated. It's largely subconscious, we're not proud of it, but we all do it to some extent. First impressions stick, and reversing a bad first impression can be an uphill battle. The concept of thin slicing reinforces why communication with charismatic colleague, confidence, trust, and promotions. Let's step out of the psychology lab and into the office. We've all seen it. The person who speaks up the most in meetings often ends up seen as a natural leader. There's even something called the Babel hypothesis in organizational psychology, which basically says that in groups, the more you talk, the more likely you are to be viewed as a leader, regardless of what you actually say. Quantity can trump quality. In one study, researchers found that in small teams, the individuals who dominated the conversation were the ones group members later identified as leaders, even when content-wise, they weren't saying particularly important things. In fact, the study noted this happened regardless of intelligence or personality of the speakers. It was simply about who grabbed airtime. In short, visibility creates its own kind of credibility. I experienced this early in my career. I had a colleague, let's call him John, who was a master of managing up through communication. In team meetings with executives, John would always be the first to speak. He wasn't the deepest technical mind, but he was excellent at packaging ideas. He'd summarize the team's achievements eloquently, often taking more credit than perhaps deserved, and he'd confidently outline plans, sometimes overly rosy. Management loved his updates. Meanwhile, quieter folks, who did a lot of the actual implementation, barely spoke or stumbled when put on the spot. Over time, guess who was seen as the go-to person on the team? John, the guy who talked the best game. He was soon promoted to a lead role. This kind of scenario is common enough that many engineers joke bitterly about talkers versus doers. It's not just anecdote. As mentioned, research backs this up. A Berkeley study by Cameron Anderson found that people who act dominant and speak up tend to be perceived as more competent by their peers, even if they actually aren't. Others judge your ability in part by how confidently you put yourself forward. This doesn't mean everyone who talks a lot is faking expertise, of course. Sometimes the person speaking up is truly smart and articulate. That's the ideal combo. But the danger is that, in the absence of better information, we use speaking as a proxy for skill. I recall a friend, an engineer named Priya, who felt this acutely. Priya once vented to me that she was overlooked for a promotion in favor of a colleague who frankly often came to her for help with tough problems. She couldn't understand it. The feedback she got was, "You need to increase your visibility." It boiled down to, her work was great, but few people knew it was great because she didn't talk about it. Her colleague was no better technically, but excelled at self-advocacy and keeping everyone informed of his progress, sometimes in excruciating detail. As frustrating as it was for Priya, the reality was her colleague's constant status updates and confident presentations made upper management feel like he was on top of everything. Priya realized that staying heads down wasn't enough. She had to broadcast her work more. This is a lesson many of us learn the hard way. Doing good work matters, but making sure others know about your good work matters too. Confidence and clear communication also breed trust. If you can explain your plan in a way that people understand, they're more likely to back it. I've sat in design review meetings where two engineers propose different solutions. The one who articulates their proposal in a structured, easy-to-follow way usually wins people over, even if the ideas are of similar merit. It's not just logic, it's human nature to trust someone who sounds like they know what they're doing. On the flip side, I've seen brilliant introverts mumble an idea that could save the project, but because their delivery was hesitant, the idea didn't get traction until someone else said virtually the same thing more forcefully. There's a silver lining here. If you truly are competent, learning to speak up will only amplify the recognition of your competence. One leadership coach put it well: if you really are competent, speaking up will help everyone else see you as the valuable employee you are. It's not about bragging. It's about ensuring your contributions aren't invisible. In the next section, though, we'll look at the darker side, what happens when we overvalue the talkers. Mistaking visibility for competence, when talkers lead us astray. We've established that being vocal can propel people into positions of influence. But what if the person with the loudest voice isn't actually the most capable? Unfortunately, this happens too. Visibility is not the same as value, and conflating the two can have consequences. A commenter on a discussion about introverted engineers nailed it. We need to stop equating visibility with value. Just because someone is always in the spotlight doesn't mean they're delivering better results. Sometimes it's quite the opposite. Let me share a cautionary tale. At a company I worked with, there was an engineer, I'll call him Max, who was extremely charismatic and assertive. Max wasn't trying to be malicious, he genuinely believed in his ideas, but his confidence far outpaced his expertise. He proposed a grand new system architecture for our product. He spoke about it so persuasively, with such enthusiasm, that leadership and even many teammates got on board. Dissenting voices, including a few quiet senior developers who had real concerns, were drowned out by Max's assured rebuttals. "Trust me, this is the future," he'd say, chest puffed out. Given his visibility and eloquence, he was unofficially leading the project's technical direction. Well, a year later, the architecture was in shambles. The design couldn't scale under real user load, and we had to scrap large parts of it, costing the company serious time and money. In retrospect, the warning signs were there in the beginning. Some truly skilled folks had tried to point out issues, but they were either too timid in pushing back or weren't heard over the buzz surrounding Max's vision. This is a classic case of mistaking confidence for competence. We trusted the loudest voice in the room instead of the right one, and it hurt. This doesn't just happen in engineering, it's everywhere. Think of the charismatic leader or executive who drives a company or project into the ground while everyone nods along, only realizing later that it was smoke and mirrors. People can be very convincing in their communication, yet very wrong in their conclusions. One contributor discussing Gladwell's Blink even warned about this in business. Some individuals with an ADHD-like rapid-fire confidence can sway others frequently, and often they're correct, but when they're wrong, they're spectacularly wrong because they didn't do the careful analysis. The danger of overvaluing style is that poor decisions get made and true experts get sidelined. In technical teams, this might mean adopting a flawed framework because its advocate made a flashy presentation, or underestimating a project risk because the manager in charge exudes optimism. There's also a personal danger. If a smooth talker rises without substance, they eventually hit a wall. Reality catches up. You can only fake it so far in a hands-on field like engineering. If you've advanced by visibility alone, eventually the lack of real results will erode trust. As one business article quipped, you can fake it till you make it, but if you lack the skills to back it up, people will notice. For those of us watching this dynamic, it's a reminder to keep our eyes open. Don't be too dazzled by confident rhetoric. Ask questions. Seek the substance behind the style. And if you happen to be a naturally confident communicator, temper it with humility and openness. The best leaders I know pair their strong communication with the habit of actively listening to quieter voices in the room, explicitly asking, "What do you think?" to those who haven't spoken. They make space to avoid falling into the trap of just following the loudest person. Mistaking visibility for competence is a pitfall we all have to guard against. We should strive for a culture where ideas are judged on merit, not on the volume or charisma with which they are delivered. That means encouraging the quieter experts to speak and valuing their input when they do, and being healthily skeptical of decisions made on charm alone. The quiet genius dilemma, overlooked and undervalued. Now let's flip the coin and talk about the quiet genius. Many of us know or are someone who is brilliant at their work but isn't naturally loud or showy. These are the engineers who often prefer to let their code or designs speak for themselves. They might sit in meetings silently formulating solutions in their head while others chatter away. When they do speak, it's brief and to the point. They don't boast about their accomplishments or engage in office self-promotion. And what happens? All too often they get overlooked. There's a saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. In the workplace, the unsqueaky wheels, the quiet high performers, sometimes don't get the recognition or opportunities they deserve because they're not drawing attention to themselves. I once managed a developer, Elena, who was a textbook quiet genius. She consistently delivered elegant, bug-free code. She had a deep understanding of our system. But in sprint demos or planning, she was almost invisible. She'd speak softly, if at all. Meanwhile, another team member, who was much newer and frankly not as skilled, made a point to regularly tout his progress and jump in on every conversation. When performance review time rolled around, I had multiple VPs praising the vocal guy's leadership on the project, mostly because they heard him a lot, whereas Elena's contributions were murky to them. I had to step up and highlight all the critical work she had done behind the scenes to ensure she got her due performance rating. It made me wonder, without a manager actively advocating for her, would she have faded into the background despite being the technical linchpin of the team? Possibly. The introvert's paradox in tech is that many engineers are naturally introverted. The job attracts deep thinkers who enjoy solitary problem solving. Yet career advancement often demands extrovert behaviors like networking, self-promotion, and public speaking. Introverted engineers don't dominate meetings, don't post flashy progress updates. They just build, as one engineer observed. In that LinkedIn post, the author notes that while others are seeking validation, introverts are quietly focusing on the work itself. There's a pride in that ethos. Let the results speak for themselves. In an ideal world, results would speak loud enough, but in reality, results often need a voice to narrate them. The dilemma is that quiet geniuses might assume their excellent work is obvious to everyone. Unfortunately, people are busy with their own tasks. They might not notice a great piece of code was you're doing, or understand the full impact of the problem you solved. If you don't tell your story, no one else will. Some introverted folks I know feel it's cheating or distasteful to self-promote. They might think, I shouldn't have to parade my accomplishments. Quality should be recognized on its own. It's a nice ideal, but not how human organizations typically function. Being consistently overlooked can breed resentment and disengagement. It's demotivating to see others less capable get opportunities or accolades while you stay in the shadows. I've heard quiet engineers say things like, "What's the point of going above and beyond? No one notices anyway." This is dangerous territory when your best people feel invisible. The team or company risks losing them either to burnout or to employers who do recognize their talent. It's incumbent on management to find and reward these quieter contributors, and it's incumbent on the quiet geniuses themselves to at least occasionally step into the light. As one leadership mentor told me, it's not bragging if it's facts. You can share what you did or the insights you've gained without ego. Think of it as educating others about the project, rather than self-aggrandizement. The good news for quiet geniuses is that you don't need to become a motor mouth or a social butterfly to get noticed. Often, just small changes in communication can make a big difference. A brief update email here, a clarification in a meeting there, volunteering to present part of a tech talk, or even writing a blog post about a technical challenge you solved. These can gradually make your work more visible. We'll cover more on that in the next section. But one more thing to acknowledge. Many quiet, highly skilled people suffer internally from doubt, especially when overlooked. Let's delve into that emotional psychological toll. The toll of being undervalued, imposter syndrome, and burnout. Being the unsung hero isn't just a career hurdle, it can also take a psychological toll. When someone is great at what they do but continually undervalued or overshadowed, they might start questioning themselves. Maybe I'm not actually that good, they think. Why does that guy get all the praise? Perhaps I'm missing something. Over time, this can spiral into what we know as imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is the persistent feeling that you're a fraud, that your success isn't deserved, or that you're not as competent as people think, and that eventually you'll be exposed. Ironically, it tends to hit high achievers the most, often the quiet geniuses and conscientious workers. You have external evidence of your talent, like you're literally solving hard problems daily, yet you discount it. Every achievement might be chalked up to luck, timing, or others being fooled into thinking you're smart. When a capable person constantly doesn't get recognition or rewards, it reinforces a false internal narrative. See, you're not that special after all, you're just faking it. For engineers from underrepresented groups, women, minorities in tech, etc., this can be amplified. If you rarely see people like yourself celebrated in your org, you might subconsciously internalize that you don't belong at the top. Imposter feelings then mix with that external lack of representation. I felt this myself at one point. Earlier in my career, I was the only junior developer in a meeting of senior architects. I was also the only woman in the room. I knew I had done as much homework on the design proposal as anyone, but I barely said a word while the others debated. Afterwards, I chastised myself for not speaking up, and when the design had issues that I had silently anticipated, I really kicked myself. But instead of confidently voicing I had the answer, I found myself wondering if maybe I hadn't been sure enough of my idea, even though I was right. That's classic imposter thinking, doubting your own competence even when evidence says you're competent. The emotional impact of being great but undervalued can include stress, anxiety, and burnout. You're working hard, doing awesome stuff, but seeing little payoff or acknowledgement. That can make you feel why bother after a while. Some people leave otherwise good jobs because they feel invisible or underappreciated. Others stay, but mentally disengage. They do the minimum since excellence isn't rewarded anyway. Imposter syndrome can also make it even harder to speak up, creating a vicious cycle. You doubt yourself, so you stay quiet or avoid the limelight, which then ensures you remain overlooked, which then further convinces you that you must not be worthy. Breaking out of that cycle requires intentional effort and often encouragement from peers or mentors. It's worth noting that not only the quiet geniuses suffer in this dynamic. Sometimes even the charismatic folks who advanced might feel a form of imposter syndrome, worrying that they talked their way up and now have to deliver. There's pressure to keep up the facade. So this whole style over substance thing can hurt everyone in different ways. The quiet ones feel undervalued, the talkers fear being discovered as not as capable as their image, and teams suffer from potential conflicts or poor outcomes. Ultimately, if you feel undervalued, try to separate feelings from facts. Look at your track record objectively. If you have concrete accomplishments, remind yourself, even list out that you did those. The lack of recognition says more about the environment than about you. And then, consider what actions you can take to change the situation, either by improving your communication or by finding an environment that values your style of contribution. Don't let self-doubt make you shrink further. That's like letting a bully win by silencing you. In the next section, we'll discuss some ways to push back against that silence in practical terms. Finding your voice, communication tips for engineers. By now, it's clear that communicating well can be as critical to an engineering career as writing good code. The good news is that communication is a skill and you can improve it with practice just like coding. You don't have to morph into an extrovert or a TED Talk champion overnight. Small steps go a long way. Here are some practical tips for engineers or anyone to improve their communication, visibility, and confidence. Realize your ideas have value, even if not perfect. Don't hold back until you think you have the perfect solution or sentence. In meetings, it's better to contribute something than to stay silent. If you never speak, people might literally think you have nothing to contribute. You don't need to be right all the time, you just need to be part of the conversation. Remember, people write off people who don't speak. Trust that your perspective is worth hearing. Don't overthink, just speak. Many quiet folks have rich thoughts but hesitate trying to polish them in their head first. By the time you've perfectly crafted your sentence mentally, the discussion may have moved on. Try blurting out your point, politely of course, without obsessing over perfection. It's okay if it's a bit rough, you can clarify as you go. The key is to get your voice in the mix. Don't worry about making it perfect, just say it. Over time, speaking becomes easier and more natural. Use easy openings to chime in. If jumping in cold is hard, piggyback on something someone else said. For example, I agree with Jane's idea and I'd add that we should consider X. Or building on what John mentioned, I think. This way you don't feel like you have to introduce a brand new idea out of thin air. Even echoing an idea with your own twist shows you are engaged. You don't have to be the first to speak, nor have a completely original point to add value. Speak up, especially if you disagree constructively. It can be intimidating to voice dissent, but if you see a problem or have an alternate suggestion, say it. Often others might be thinking the same thing but are afraid to mention it. Bringing a different viewpoint can actually earn respect, because it shows you're thinking critically and care about the outcome. Conflicting viewpoints add depth and can spark better ideas. Just be respectful and focus on the idea, not the person. Narrate your work regularly. Don't assume everyone knows what you're doing. Drop brief updates about your progress or achievements in whatever channels your team uses, status meetings, emails, Slack, etc. For example, completed the payment module refactor, it's running 2x faster now. Or just fixed that nasty login bug that was affecting 5% of users. This isn't bragging, it's informing. It keeps your contributions visible. If you solved a tough problem, consider writing a short internal blog or giving a brown bag talk about it. This not only showcases your work, but also helps others learn from it. Prepare for meetings and have a point to share. If you're nervous about speaking in a meeting, prepare 1 or 2 points in advance. Jot down a question or an insight you have about the agenda topic. That way you know you have something to say. For example, in a design review you might prepare, I want to ask about how this approach will handle X case. Or in a retro, I noticed our build pipeline broke 3 times last sprint. Maybe we should address that. Having a pre-planned remark can reduce the anxiety of improvising on the spot. Practice storytelling with your work. Try to frame your technical work in a simple story format when explaining to others. What was the problem? Why did it matter? How did you approach it? What was the result? Even a quick update can follow that structure. We were hitting a memory limit problem that could have crashed the site. Why it matters. I investigated and found a data leak approach, and after fixing it we brought memory usage down by 30%. Result. This narrative style helps non-experts appreciate your work and keeps them engaged, rather than listing dry technical details with no context. Leverage one-on-one settings if group speaking is too hard initially. If large meetings freak you out, start by communicating more in one-on-ones or small groups. Share your ideas with a trusted coworker or your manager individually. Say in a one-on-one, I have some thoughts on the project direction. That still gets your ideas out there. A good manager will then amplify your idea in broader forums and ideally give you credit. As Alice suggested in our chat, over time you can ease into speaking up in larger forums. Use body language and voice to your advantage. Simple tweaks. Speak a bit louder than you think you need to, so you don't get drowned out. Make eye contact, sit up straight, or lean in. It conveys you're interested and confident. These not only make others pay attention to you more, but also make you feel more confident. There's truth to power poses. Carrying yourself with assurance can actually reduce your internal stress. Ask questions. If you're hesitant to state an opinion, asking a thoughtful question is a great way to participate and demonstrate insight. It can even guide the discussion. For instance, have we considered how this will work under heavy load? Or what's our rollback plan if this deployment fails? Good questions can be as impressive as good answers because they show you're thinking critically. They also often steer the group to important points that might have been overlooked. Remember, you don't have to do all these at once. Pick one or two strategies that feel most comfortable and try them. Maybe this week you focus on chiming in at least once per daily stand-up. Next week you volunteer to demo something you build. The key is consistent practice. Each positive experience will build your confidence for the next. And yes, it will feel awkward at times. That's normal. Think of it like learning a new programming language. The first lines of code feel clunky, but soon you become fluent. One more tip: if possible, find a mentor or a coach. This could be an official mentor or just a colleague you admire who's a good communicator. Observe how they handle meetings or presentations. Maybe even ask them for feedback or to be a sounding board. Sometimes a friend can even help by tossing a question to you in a meeting. Hey, didn't you have an idea about this, Alice? To give you an entry point to speak. Finally, if you're on the other side, if you're a naturally outspoken person or a manager, be mindful to create space for others. Hold back occasionally and invite quieter team members to share. In meetings, you can literally say, "I'd love to hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet." Name, "What do you think about this?" That nudge can make a world of difference to someone who has great thoughts but just needs that little opening to voice them. Improving communication is not about becoming someone you're not. It's about making sure the quality of your ideas is seen and heard. When you pair strong skills with strong communication, you become unstoppable. Conclusion: marrying mastery with message. In the end, the tech world and the world at large rewards not just the people who can build the best system, but those who can explain why the system matters, persuade others of the approach, and rally the team around it. It's about marrying your mastery with a compelling message. The overarching theme we've explored is that being highly skilled isn't a guarantee of recognition or influence. You have to let others see your skill through how you present yourself and your work. We saw through the Dr. Fox experiment that style can deceive. A silver-tongued talker can temporarily outshine experts. We learned from Dunning-Kruger that confidence often inversely correlates with competence for some, meaning those who know least may shout the loudest, while true experts might whisper in self-doubt. We discussed how in a blink we make snap judgments on who's capable, so those initial impressions and articulations carry outsized weight. We shared anecdotes of confident communicators getting ahead and the very real dangers when style trumps substance and decisions go awry. We empathized with the quiet geniuses, often unsung, fighting feelings of imposter syndrome while their contributions go unnoticed. The takeaway is not that you should abandon substance for style. On the contrary, the goal is to have both. Think of communication as the amplifier for your skill. With it, your good work resonates and is remembered. Without it, your work might remain an unheard melody. If you're an engineer who's been reluctant to raise your voice, I encourage you to start practicing those communication muscles. As you do, you'll likely find new doors opening, more trust from colleagues, more leadership opportunities, maybe that promotion that used to slip by. And if you're someone who's naturally better at the talk than the tech, take it as a reminder to always ground your confident communication in truth and humility. Use your gift of gab to lift up the good ideas around you, not just your own. Help draw out the thoughts of your quieter teammates. Often they have gems of insight if you give them the floor. To all readers, become a storyteller of your own work. You don't have to be Shakespeare, just speak from your experience, share your reasoning, and don't be afraid to show a bit of personality. When you propose an idea, don't just present the code, tell the story of the problem it solves. When you fix a bug, explain the detective journey you took. People love a good detective story. These narratives stick in people's minds and paint a picture of you as not only a doer, but a thinker and leader. Finally, remember that communication is a journey, not a switch. Every presentation, every meeting, every brainstorming chat is a chance to get a little better at articulating your thoughts. Even the seasoned staff engineers you admire were once nervous juniors stumbling through their words. I sure was. They got better by repeatedly stepping outside their comfort zone. In a field that changes as fast as ours, one thing remains constant: the need to share knowledge and ideas effectively. By sharpening your storytelling and public speaking skills, you're not only advancing your career, you're enriching your whole team and community. After all, the best ideas in the world die in silence, but even a decent idea can change the world if it's heard by the right ears. So, whether you're the quiet genius ready to be heard, or the smooth talker aiming to back words with substance, strive for that blend of excellence and expression. Be the engineer who can both build the rocket and inspire everyone with the vision of why it matters. When you combine skill with the power to articulate it well, there's no limit to how far you can go. Safe coding, and don't forget to tell your story. That's it for today's episode. See you in the next one.